Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, joining our webinar entitled NHS in Crisis, Fighting Back. My name is Mark Jones, member of the Norfolk and Suffolk Morning Star Readers and Supporters Group and one of the founding coordinators of the Toothless in Suffolk campaign. I'd just like to state at the outset my gratitude to the Morning Star and the CP who have helped pull this webinar together and enabled this event to be streamed across multiple social media platforms. From the very outset of this pandemic, the NHS has been put under more and more pressure. The word crisis has been used to describe the situation found in hospitals, patient care centres. Hospital waiting lists have grown, the NHS supply chain is in crisis, and a multitude of other facets of the NHS treatment in just about every newspaper article or news broadcast. The word crisis is being used. But this crisis hasn't come about just because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Decades of neglect, underinvestment, and soft privatisation of the NHS has been an ever-present since the 1980s. It has to be said that treatment on the NHS is unmatched, and those that work to make us better and improve our lives are forever in our debt. But to get that treatment in the first place, you and I will have suffered in some shape or form delays in treatment or being forced to go private in some cases just to jump the queue because you've said enough. And increasingly that has become the rule rather than the exception. The mental, physical and financial hardships of patients are matched equally by those who work in and for the NHS. These instances have been well documented by numerous campaigns in support of this great institution. The webinar this evening will, I hope, go some way to clearing up some of the falsehoods that we have heard from successive governments over the years, putting into context the realities of the situation. Our panel has been especially chosen to help us better understand what's been going on in the East of England. Sadly, the stories we will hear will be reflected in every single region of England. NHS in crisis, fighting back. Our panel tonight, we have four panelists. Johnbosco Nwogbo from We Own It. Joe Rust, who is a trades union council member for the King's Lynn and District Trades Council, and also campaigner for Save Our Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We have NHS dentist Helen Duncan, who has provided the Toothless in Suffolk campaign wonderful insight into the realities of being a NHS dentist and the problems that those dentists suffer on a day-to-day basis. And also Steve Marsling, our final speaker this evening. Steve is one of the coordinators and co-founder of the NHS, the Toothless in Suffolk campaign. So to our first speaker, I should say that we will have at the end of this session a question and answer session. Please put your questions in the chat if you're on Zoom, watching this on Zoom, and we'll hope to pick up those and put those to the panelists this evening. So to our first panelist, Johnbosco Nwogbo works as a campaigns officer at We Own It. According to his biography on the We Own It website, He got his start in campaigning in the mid-2010s at the University of Fort Hare, South Africa, as part of the fees must fall and decolonise the curriculum movements. For the past 3 years, John Bosco has been a campaigner for renters and community rights as part of the ACORN, the community union. As for his work with We Own It, he's engaged in the campaign against the privatisation of Channel 4, stopping any further sell-off of NHS GP practices to American insurance providers, and that's just to name but a few. John Bosco is also studying towards a PhD in philosophy at the University of Essex. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a virtual warm welcome to John Bosco. Over to you, John Bosco.
Thank you so much, Mark. And just a quick correction. I've never been to Essex, so it's Sussex, not Essex. I must have said it to you on the phone. But thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm really happy to be here. Unfortunately, I will not be around at the end to answer questions because I also have to speak at another meeting in about 30 minutes. So I'm really sorry about that. I wish I could have been here for the whole thing, but thank you so much for having us. I'd like to start by saying a little bit about We Own It, and you have already given some indication about who we are and what we do. But just to give people a more general understanding of the work We Own It does, we kind of believe in one basic principle. We pay taxes for our public services, all our public services, from schools to garbage collection to the NHS, to trains, to Channel 4, and we should run them. They should not be run by private corporations. They should not be run for profit. They should be run for people. So I spend pretty much my entire working day campaigning against the privatization of our public services. And as Mark mentioned, the government's consultation on potentially selling off Channel 4 is coming to an end today. And over the last week, I've worked very hard with my colleagues at We Own It to get thousands of people to put in responses to that consultation. Fingers crossed that we managed to push them back on this, as we have managed to do in the past. But my remarks today will be about the NHS, entirely about the NHS. And I want to kind of break it up into two portions. I want to speak first about a particular instance of widespread privatization of an element of our NHS that is currently happening and going under the radar, and that I think it's quite important for people to become aware of. And the other part of it will be more general about what the government is actually doing in legislation right now to open the NHS to even more privatization. So in February this year, we became aware that an American corporation, Centene Corporation, whose revenues runs in the tens of billions of pounds every year, took over 49 NHS GP surgeries in London. Of course, it's a national problem because they had already had control of about 21 GP surgeries across the rest of England. And they were able to do so by taking over what we like to think of as a traditional GP partnership, which is a bunch of GPs coming together to create a partnership to run GP surgeries. This was not very traditional because they ran a whole lot of GP surgeries, and people like to describe them as doctorpreneurs, essentially doctors who are almost just as interested in money as private corporations are. But that's not, at least as far as I'm aware, that's not the norm in terms of primary care. Most GP surgeries are probably run by doctors who are generally very small scale and kind of focus on their community. So they took over 80 medics, and as a consequence, took over the 49 surgeries that Centene was running, or that 80 medics was running. Just to highlight as well that the chief executive of Centene's UK company called Operos Health, very soon after that, was actually hired by Boris Johnson to become a special advisor on health matters to him at number 10. So it's not just a question of taking over a host of our GP practices, but of course have had the government open their arms to welcome this company into the heart of policymaking at number 10. So just to highlight two main reasons why we kind of took on the mantle, and not just us, of course, a good many NHS campaigning organizations also kind of started working against Centene running GP surgeries. We initially started trying to prevent them from actually officially taking them over, and that effort is still ongoing. There's currently a judicial review at the moment in the courts to question the legality of the decision to allow them to take over without any kind of consultation with patients. And what we have now started doing essentially is campaigning to make sure that whenever the contracts for each of those surgeries expire, that the local health authorities don't renew those contracts. And we've had some success recently preventing a renewal that was scheduled before we started campaigning, was scheduled to be done for 5 years in Hammersmith and Fulham. We managed to get it cut down to just 2 years. So Centene will hopefully be leaving that practice in the next 2 years. And very recently in July, we also heard that we were able to get the local health authority to end Centene's engagement there in 2 GP practices in Islington, where we had actually really campaigned hard with the help of the 2 Islington MPs, of course, Jeremy Corbyn and Emily Thornbury. They will be leaving those surgeries in July next year, which is very much ahead of what we thought was the schedule. So the campaigning around that is working. But I wanted to say a little bit about why we oppose Centene on this issue, but also broadly why private companies should not be running GP surgeries. Centene has such a terrible track record, and we found that it's really useful to kind of focus in on these 2 elements, their track record and the fact that this is privatization, because we've found that we've actually been able to get a good number of conservative councillors in London, for example, to support the campaign against Centene by highlighting the issue of their track record. They may not be as willing to cooperate on the question of privatization, but at the moment you kind of put this company's track record to them in a way that kind of says to them, if you don't do something about this, you know, given this track record, that this company is going to mess up. And everybody will know that we told you about this issue. And if you do nothing about it, then it will be on your hands when it happens. So we managed to get a good number of conservative conservative councillors in London, but also a good number of Lib Dem and other party and Labour councillors as well. Centene's track record in the UK, of course, includes abandoning a surgery in Harlow, Essex, just a few months after getting the contract to run it. And that led the CCG to close down that surgery. And for people who are familiar with that part of the country, if you close one surgery, it means that people who use that surgery could have to travel up to an hour to the next GP surgery. So this had a real effect on local people, and even the Daily Mail that would normally be in favor of a company like Centene actually wrote a scathing article against Centene at the time and called them profit greedy. Yeah, and of course we know that they've also left practices in Leicester and Camden, and it seems to be their pattern, and they're not very ashamed of that pattern. In fact, in their 2019 company annual report, they actually said that it's their strategy to abandon services or contracts that do not, quote unquote, meet their profitability targets. So their track record is one that indicates that this company is going to leave this service if it does not fulfill their profitability objectives. And of course, they have an even worse track record in the US that I don't want to go into here for time reasons. The second, and I think the more important reason why we opposed Centene on this issue, and of course, why we will continue to fight against private companies running GP surgeries, whether it's Centene or any other corporation, is the fact that this is privatization. And just at the heart of the issue, and I think people who are listening to this call or this webinar are likely to be fairly conversant with the idea that if a company is running a public service, their primary objective is to make profit. And Centene has, of course, already demonstrated that in their strategy, but also in their practice elsewhere across the country. That has an effect on the quality of the service people get. It also has an effect on whether or not people actually get that service, right? Because if you get a contract to run a GP surgery and then you close it and get away, because for you it was just a dot or a thumbtack on a board, on a map somewhere that says we have this number of GP surgeries, without actually caring very much about the community, you deprive people of the service. And of course, in actually running those services, their objective is to cut costs and save money. And we've been speaking with GPs who work at some of these surgeries that are run by Centene, and they have been highlighting some of the practices that they've seen Centene actually carry out in order to save money. And when we're already actually seeing the result of some of those, in June this year, the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, looked into 3 surgeries that are run by Centene in London, in Newham, and they found that whereas those surgeries were rated by the CQC to be good in 2018 when they were run by traditional GP surgery, this year they've just been rated inadequate, all 3 of them. And the CQC said that those practices were now unsafe for patients. And those are the results of the cost-cutting measures, as far as we're concerned, of the cost-cutting measures that Centene has put in place in those places. And of course, this is not just theorizing. There are also a study published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine actually found that GP surgeries that are run by private firms like Centene are much worse for patients than GP surgeries that are run by traditional GP partnerships. Of course, ideally, we would like to see that service run by the NHS in the way that, for example, doctors work at hospitals. They have a set number of hours, they do their job, they get paid their salary, and that's it, right? And I think ideally that would be a good model where the buildings are owned by the NHS, all of the equipment is owned by the NHS, and this is not run in that kind of quasi privatized framework. Yeah, and finally, one of the elements of the law that allowed Centene to run GP surgeries is something called an APMS contract. An alternative provider medical services contract. It was introduced in 2004, which essentially allowed companies that are not run by medical professionals to apply for and get contracts to run GP surgeries. Those are the kinds of contracts that essentially allowed Centene to take over AT Medics. It looks like the owners of AT Medics have been working hard over a number of years to only get contracts that were given under APMS contracts. It looked like they had always planned to sell their company, and they knew it would be impossible if they were holding contracts that were not APMS contracts. So this particular kind of contract is one of the mechanisms that's allowing private companies to run GP surgeries. Now, this is just a question of a particular instance where private companies are able to come into our NHS and take over chunks of it. And of course, there are other instances as well. Recently, we understand that NHS England was supposed to put out an advisory to NHS trusts across the country to make arrangements to potentially put out their diagnostic departments to what they called corporate partners, essentially to privatize their diagnostics departments. We raised a bit of a stink about that at the time, I have not heard anything more from NHS England about it. So they have not issued that advice yet, or rather they have not followed up on that advice yet. So we're keeping an eye on that. And of course, they're trying to do the same across other areas of the NHS. But I think that at the backdrop of this, and perhaps more important, is what happens at the level of legislation. And you may be aware that the government in July tabled the Health and Care Bill, which would essentially rearrange or reorganize the NHS, essentially from the top down. This bill would create 42 integrated care systems, essentially, where we have about 140 CCGs at the moment, or I like to call them health authorities, as a lot of people don't know what CCGs are. They would essentially divide them up, rather bring them together into 42 integrated care systems. And those integrated care systems will have boards that essentially oversee the work of finding out the health needs of the local communities around there, designing the care for those communities, commissioning the care for those communities. And something quite sinister at the heart of this, of course, several things quite sinister about this bill, and we've been campaigning very vociferously against the bill as a whole, but we're also paying a great deal of attention to specific things that the bill would do. One of which, for example, is the possibility that it could allow private companies like Virgin Care to sit on those boards that oversee this care. So essentially, private companies will be able to sit on the boards that decide what kind of care and who to commission that care with, essentially giving themselves the power to decide to give themselves charge for providing services. Yeah, of course, the government would like people to think that that this bill is essentially an anti-privatization bill, because they're pitching it as saying, well, we are scrapping the 2012 Lansley Act, and that was the bill that allowed privatization to explode in the NHS. That's not an entirely fair characterization of things, but they're casting it that way, which has essentially allowed them to trick the media into thinking that this bill would actually do anything to deal with privatization. But whereas I think the real picture is they're allowing private companies to come into the heart of the NHS where services are actually commissioned. And also without putting in an amendment to the bill that would make NHS trusts and NHS Foundation trusts the default provider of NHS care. What they're essentially doing by scrapping Section 75 of the Lansley Act is allow ICS boards to just hand out contracts to private companies without any kind of scrutiny, right? So this is something that we've been campaigning against really hard for the last couple of months. And we had a bit of good news today, although of course we still have to keep an eye on it. Today was the second day of, so actually the first day of the portion of the bill where the Public Bills Committee investigates or kind of scrutinizes the bill. And one of the amendments that were actually, some of the amendments that were discussed today included amendments that were tabled by Labour that would ban private companies from sitting on ICS boards. And while the government did not support the amendments that were put forward by Labour, and of course Labour in their traditional fashion withdrew the amendments at the end of that process, they're going to retable it at report stage, I understand. But the government actually indicated that they are willing to put forward their own amendment that would ban people with significant interest in private healthcare from sitting on those boards. So it seems that the pressure that we've been trying to put on them is having an effect, but we do have to keep an eye to see the quality of that amendment that they want to put forward, what it actually says, and hopefully we will have some good news on that front. Of course, we don't believe that we're going to have eye-watering success. The government has a solid majority in Parliament, but one thing that we're going to be trying to do throughout is really putting pressure on them. And hopefully, Labour also put an amendment that would ban APMS contracts. And we're going to be working as hard as possible to get those amendments into the bill in some form or the other. Obviously, the government may not accept it in the form that, that Labour is putting out, that we would like it to be put. But at the very least, we would like, first of all, we would like the bill to be scrapped. But failing that, we will work as hard as possible to get a bill that is less bad than it would have been without the intervention of activists trying to put pressure on this. So that is really where we should be working really hard, because once we can sort out this problem at the level of legislation, then this provides us the tool to actually kind of deal with the more kind of consequent efforts at privatization that I described earlier. Thank you so much for having me, and I wish I could stay for questions, because while I was speaking, it just occurred to me that there are questions that people might be asking about some of the things I was saying. And somebody just asked if it is nationwide. Yes, it is. Our campaign on the bill is nationwide, and you can of course sign up on our website, weownit.org.uk, to get involved in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johnbosco. Absolutely fabulous hearing all of that. What a great communicator you are, and it shows, you know, Johnbosco's so eloquently shown that gains can be made, and they can be achieved through well-organised pressure groups, such as We Own It. Do please, I implore everybody who's either watching this live or indeed watching this at a later date, to just point their browser to weownit.org.uk, and also to their that's their website, and also to their social media platforms as well. Please give them a follow, give them a like. They are, We Own It, Johnbosco and his colleagues are helping to unpick the jargon that's bandied around in newsrooms and on news platforms, Sky and BBC, by government ministers and so forth, and their supporters. But I'm absolutely very grateful that you were able to join us, Johnbosco. I know you have to dash now, but I'm sure everyone here will join me in wishing Johnbosco and everybody at We Own It, the team there, fantastic team, do some incredible work that really help put into context what's going on. We wish them very well. And all the very best for the future. Thank you very much, Johnbosco of We Own It. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Our next panelist. By the way, you're watching a live stream, or maybe not. You're watching it back. A live stream of NHS in Crisis, Fighting Back. Our next panelist goes by the name of Joe Rust, a resident of King's Lynn, a port, and it's a market town in West Norfolk, where there's injustice. I think it's fair to say Joe is at the forefront of campaigns to right wrongdoing, or is seen working in local community volunteer programs such as food banks. The campaign to rebuild King's Lynn's Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Save Our QEH, has put into sharp focus the decades-long lack of investment in local healthcare facilities. The sight of hospital ward ceilings and roofs being held up with temporary props has united the local community in protest, demanding government investment now, not later. Joe sits as an independent councillor on King's Lynn and West Norfolk Borough Council, and is secretary of the King's Lynn and District Trades Council. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Joe, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Mark. Our Trades Council, of which I've been the secretary for over a decade, is incredibly active here. And I'd go as far as to say that our organisation in King's Lynn is the one that does the majority of the campaigning in our area. And we have done right from the word go when it was reformed back in 2009. And so while I am an elected borough councillor, the work I do in the campaigning in the area is predominantly through the Trades Council. I have far greater flexibility to do it that way. It's because of this campaign work that it was the reason that as soon as the depth of the severity of the situation with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital was known to us, we instantly rose to the occasion and started to campaign in defence of it, bearing in mind that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital has been a focus of much of our campaign work anyway, whether it's staff pay, terms and conditions or supporting strike action. We are there, and we're also there when it comes to the wider defence of our NHS, including acts that undermine it and acts that open the door for wider privatisation of services, such as the type that Johnbosco described, although it was certainly an education to me to learn about the APMS contracts with our GPs practices. So I'll certainly be doing my homework about that later on. On the Queen Elizabeth campaign banner, our logo is alongside that of the East Anglian People Before Profit, which I'm also a member of, and I know that we've got some People Before Profit members here this evening. While People Before Profit isn't party political, it most certainly is political, as all the cuts and lack of services that we're suffering from stem from over a decade, as Mark introduced, over a decade of austerity. It's particularly been worse since the Tories took over in 2010. And we all know that, but when it comes to our hospitals, we have worked hard to keep this campaign, to keep party politics out of it, because that's the only way we are going to unite the community. Around here in the vote for Brexit, 67% voted to leave the European Union. Many of those were for issues to do with immigration, and at the last election in 2009 the Conservative winner had only been here for 4 weeks before he got elected. So we know that they're very much Tory focused around here, and if we want to get their support, we have to keep it non-party political, but we absolutely know that it is. People Before Profit is a national organisation with similar aims to groups like People's Assembly, and we feel strongly that people should come before profit, and we should have secure and well-paid jobs, and we certainly shouldn't have to pay for the mess up of COVID or now Brexit. But the issue of our hospital is that, like other hospitals in the area, Hinchinbrook in Huntingdon, James Paget in Galston and East Suffolk in Bury, they were all built to a certain style and type, and they were known at that time as a quick fix hospital. They're now known as a Best Buy hospital, and not buy as in Best Buy sell day, but Best Buy as in BUY. So they were labelled as a Best Buy, even though they have been not a Best Buy at all. It's been a ridiculous waste of money. They were built using rack planks, and these are reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, and they're weaker than traditional concrete and they crack, and they just can't bear the weight at the same rate as normal concrete planks. So basically our hospital is falling down. We've already seen it in Scotland with a couple of schools having their roofs actually crash down on pupils, and they were built with the same reinforced aerated concrete that our hospital is. It's been held up, as Mark said, by props. We've got over 200 props holding it up, and not all of it has been inspected yet, so they can't actually say that it's definitely safe. And today I posted a video of a bucket in a corridor with water coming out of the ceiling, because the rain that we have had today would significantly compromise the safety of that hospital, even with 210 acro props propping it up. And it must be incredibly unnerving to patients and staff having to go to work there and seeing that. So a hospital that was built when they knew it was only going to be good for 30 years, is now over 10 years past its best by date, and we should have had one open back in 2010. But of course that didn't happen. The people in charge of the hospital back then, and our MP, Henry Bellingham, and we had the same MP from 1983 to 2019, little break when the Blair days, you know, he and successions of hospital management did nothing to change this situation. I consider our MP the most negligent, because while we see a revolving door in hospital management, he was the one that was here all the time. He was the one that was in post 3 years after our hospital was opened, and he did nothing about it, and it should have been replaced 9 years before he went in 2019, but he did nothing. Our campaign to save our hospital really started on April the 1st. I would say it's funny, but it was no joke. It really took off following a strategy meeting held on the 24th of April, where we decided on weekly demos outside the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, combined with regular town centre demos. Now, some demonstrations outside the hospital might seem a bit nonsense, but what they actually do is they show the staff on a weekly basis that local campaigners are out there working on their behalf, and they show the public, because our hospital is on the main road, and they show the public that this problem has not gone away, and it's our intention to be there every week until the situation has improved. The town centre demos enable us to speak to the public, some of whom genuinely think that because Matt Hancock came and visited it before he lost his ministerial position, that it's a done deal, that we're going to get funding for a new one, and that's absolutely not the case. We designed leaflets containing information about why we need a new hospital, because there are so many people out there that don't know. And so this provides information for them. It still contains Matt Hancock's name, sadly. So, you know, that will be coming up for edit pretty shortly. But more importantly, we designed these postcards for members of the public to sign and send off to Matt Hancock and now Sajid Javid. And it's been these postcards which have had a big impact, because unlike the electronic petitions, people see these, they can feel them, and they can actually put a stamp on them and send them off. So they feel that they are taking some very practical action. And we know that there have been hundreds, if not thousands, already sent off to whichever Secretary of State for Health is in at the current time. We had 10,000 of these postcards printed. We have given out about 8,000. Now, all our materials, I designed them. That was a stressful weekend. And luckily our local printer tidied them up for us, but they've all been paid for by our Trades Council, which, as you know, it brings together members of different trade unions to campaign around important local issues. And we absolutely know that hundreds of these postcards have been returned because our local Labour Party have paid for them to be sent back, and they included a nice little letter to both Hancock and Sajid Javid in it. We also had a really large rally, a march on the National NHS Day, when Jeremy Corbyn came to King's Lynn and spoke. And although that prompted quite a bit of attention and not all of it positive, it maintained our campaign at the forefront of local publicity, and it was wider than just King's Lynn. It made the local news look east as well, and that's one of the main focuses of our campaign. We have to keep this in the forefront of people's minds. We've had numerous town centre demos, but also in the smaller towns which are serviced by our hospital, because while it's only a mile up the road from me, it actually services an area of 1,500 squared kilometres that covers approximately 331,000 people. So it's really important that we go out to see where the people are, rather than expecting them to come to us. This is part of our fight back against this crisis. But they have come to us as well. I sent out a motion to all parish councils in the area, asking them to pass this motion, showing their support for not just the campaign, but supporting the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And about 25 of them came back to say that they'd passed the motion, and they also requested postcards to be sent to them. And the campaign is in the paper, been in the paper a fair few number of times on a practically monthly basis. And each time it is in there, it results in people phoning me up or emailing me asking for postcards to be sent to them. So it's been really successful. Tomorrow we're off to Parliament to hand deliver our postcards to the local MPs, and we hope to Sajid Javid. We're taking a local reporter with us, and it's been covered on Radio Norfolk. And we make sure that we get the maximum amount of publicity from everything we do. You know, there's literally a press release goes out all the time. And we have to do this, as I said, to make sure that people know getting the funding isn't a done deal. You know, Matt Hancock might have said, oh, it looks bad, but he didn't guarantee any funding. This is what we want. And there are too many people out there that think, you know, because they've signed a petition, that's it, they don't need to do anything else. We know that the Tories don't care about the NHS, whether it's our dentistry services or our NHS medical care. And we're pretty much the same as you here in Norfolk, certainly in King's Lynn, with a lack of NHS dentistry available. And we have to also remember that our MP doesn't even use our hospital, and neither did the previous one. Their primary residences are in London, and that's where they'll get their health services from, unless of course they have an accident in King's Lynn and they have to be taken to N&E. And the state of our teeth aren't any matter of concern for them either, and neither is a delay in us accessing these services, because it can't be offered from our local hospital anymore. And we have to travel to Norwich or Cambridge. People keep saying that our hospital won't be closed, and in matter of fact, I'm one of them. But just because they won't close it doesn't mean that it won't end up as little more than a cottage hospital if we don't get the funding for a new one, because there is no doubt that without funding, it will lose services. It'll be physically impossible for it to continue to offer the same level of care as it currently does, because the fabric of the building just isn't up to it. They already have to care for the bariatric patients in specific and limited areas because they're too heavy to go on the second floor. They're hiving off services to the bigger and better funded hospitals like the Norfolk and Norwich and like Addenbrooke's. And if we lose our A&E and maternity services in King's Lynn, that's it. We won't have a district general hospital anymore. It will just be a cottage hospital. And this is a risk that this is going to happen because staff won't want to come and work at a hospital that currently has to have safety signs up warning them to use an emergency phone number if they hear creaking sounds or if water starts coming through. Would you want to go and work in a dodgy building like that? So it's almost inevitable, because we won't be able to get the staff, so they won't be able to offer the services, and they can't offer the services because the building's falling down. Hospital management have already put in a bid for one new build that was refused last September. So while we have to pretend it's not party political, the fact that the Tories have already turned them down once is clear evidence that it is. They've since put in another one, which contains a bid for a new build, but also one of which is for a phased redevelopment, meaning it'll be cheaper in the first instance, but far more expensive in the long run. And we might end up with a half-completed building if we can't get the phased funding to go with the phased redevelopment. So watch this space. We won't be fooled by any announcements of a new build, because if they offer a monetary sum of only a couple of $100 million, it sounds a lot to the ordinary person, but it will only put up a fraction of the hospital that we need. As a borough councillor, I'll be at a new hospital briefing next week, and of course we'll be chatting to the MPs about it tomorrow. So it's a constant thing for us here, and we will, much like Johnbosco and his campaigning, we will keep it up until the end. So watch this space is what I say. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Jo. Fabulous, hugely informative, and it just goes to show once again how campaigns, not just in this region, the east of England, but they are going on elsewhere, how we can use innovative ways to get wider publicity and buy-in from the community, the local communities in which these healthcare facilities serve. And as for the postcard idea, I mean, who doesn't like receiving a postcard? That's great. Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, you're watching a live stream, or perhaps not. Maybe you're watching this back of NHS in Crisis, Fighting Back. My name is Mark Jones, one of the coordinators in the Toothless in Suffolk campaign, and here as moderator on behalf of the Morning Star Readers and Supporters Group in Norfolk and Suffolk. Moving on to our third speaker this evening, I'm delighted to introduce Helen Duncan. Helen began her training as a dentist at the Royal Dental Hospital in London's Leicester Square. When it was forced to close its doors in 1983, we know the 80s very well, she was transferred to Guy's Hospital, from where she later qualified in 1987. Helen's father, as I understand it, was one of the nation's first NHS GPs when it was founded by Nye Bevan in 1948. Her love and passion for the NHS and what it stands for has been instilled in her from day one. These strong beliefs and principles have seen her move out and away from practices that have been taken over by big corporations. Indeed, Helen gave up working as an NHS dentist in May of this year for reasons which I'm sure she'll explain. But giving up a career 7 hours earlier than anticipated, originally planned, is evidence enough that the system isn't working for dentists, nor indeed the public. Helen provides expert advice and information to the Toothless in Suffolk campaign, and ask you all to welcome her to the floor. Over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Right, hello everyone. It was actually gave up 7 years ago, not 7 hours, I think you said. Right, I'm not the world's greatest speaker, but I will try my best. As you've heard, I recently gave up being an NHS dentist. I've been an NHS dentist since 1987. I've rarely done any private work, mainly just for people who wanted something cosmetic. I've always passionately wanted to be an NHS dentist and have done so. The new contract came out in 2006. Before that, dentists could work, just got themselves an NHS number, they could set up practice wherever they liked, and they could just do NHS dentistry as they liked. But the government decided this was getting a bit too costly for them, because a lot of dentists were working very hard and seeing lots of patients. So they decided to bring in a contract to cap the amount of money that you could earn. So what happened was each dental practice was given a contract. Now, these contracts are quite complicated, so I'm just going to slightly tell you how they work. You're given a set amount of money, and for that money you have to do so many UDAs, which is units of dental activity. It's like points. They developed a banding system, bands 1, 2 and 3. Band 1 is worth 1 UDA, band 2 is worth 3 UDAs, and band 3 is worth 12 UDAs. Now, well, I'll take band 2, which involves having a checkup. You can have a clean, your x-rays, and all the fillings and all the root treatments and all the extractions you like. That's what it's meant to be. Now, the patient pays £65.20 towards that, and the dentist receives about £80 for that. So really the government is only contributing about £15 to that treatment. Now, the problem is, if a patient only needs 1 filling, that's great. But what if someone comes to you who needs 10 fillings, 3 extractions, 4 root canal treatments, we get paid exactly the same amount. So I always give the example of, if you went to a pub and a pint of beer cost you £5, that's great. But if suddenly the government said you can have as many pints of beer as you like in that one session, what would happen to the landlord of that pub? They'd go bankrupt. Now, we often hear on the radio, on the news, everyone loves to bash the dentist. We're very greedy, evidently. All we think about is money, money, money. And one of the reasons we do think a lot about money is because dental surgeries are very, very, very expensive places to run. You've got staffing. I just can't explain just how much you have to pay to run a dental surgery. It's ridiculous. Now, the NHS money that you get barely covers the costs. So a lot of practices have to do private treatment. And you'll find that a lot of the mixed practices that do NHS and private treatment, the private side is actually funding the NHS side. You'll rarely these days find a pure NHS surgery. They just cannot afford to run it. I recently went to a meeting and I actually got laughed at because I am just an NHS dentist. They couldn't understand how I wasn't doing private. I have just given up dentistry because the pressure of trying to get your UDAs on time, you have to do so much work to get this. You get paid so little, and you can't afford on the NHS to use the best equipment, the best materials. You are skimping. And I've just got to that point where I'm not prepared to skimp on the patients. They don't deserve it. Yeah, so I therefore gave up dentistry. My stress levels were very high. My mental health was going downhill. So I had to give up. And as I've said, the NHS has lost a dentist that could have worked for another 7 years. Now, I'm not the only person that's given up recently. COVID, a lot of dentists have given up. In Leiston, which is where Toothless in Suffolk started, 2 dental surgeries have closed down. Now, they belong to corporates. And one of the reasons I think that they've closed down is because they can't do enough private work to cover the NHS. Leiston is not a wealthy area, so therefore they can't push the private work. When the new contract came out in 2006, before that, you had to be a dentist to have a contract. 2006, they changed it so that corporates could take over, but they had to have 1 dentist on board. So what happens with these corporates is that they have their dentists, they don't give them very good materials, the staffing issues are terrible. There's just so many problems with it. And they've got to make a profit because their investors have put in a lot of money and want a lot of money back. I believe recently my dentist just sold for £700 million. So those investors obviously want their money. I know of a dentist who worked for a corporate recently who took over a practice, and he had to do a lot of work on the patients because they had been neglected a bit by the person who retired. He wasn't getting his UDAs, so he got hauled up in front of all the big area managers and got bawled at by them, absolutely torn to pieces. And this is a professional dentist being told by a pen pusher what they can and can't do. So what happens when a dentist decides to retire? They're allowed to sell their contract. Over the years, they've obviously invested hundreds of thousands of pounds in their practices, so they're going to sell to the highest person. And 9 times out of 10, that's corporate. So the corporates just get bigger and bigger and bigger. If you're a new dentist now, you've just qualified, you probably owe about 80 grand in student loans at least. And you have to do a year's vocational training. Now, years ago, you'd go and work with somebody, you'd learn your your profession, and then after 3 to 5 years, you go out and open your own practice somewhere. That's unless you became a partner of the practice you were in. You can't do that now because A, there aren't any contracts to get. You can't afford to outbid a corporate. And then if by any strange chance a new contract does come up, you have to bid for it, you have to tender for it, you need an army of lawyers to help you. Now, just the normal dentist hasn't got those facilities or that sort of money to employ corporate lawyers to help them. So what happens? The corporates end up buying them all out. So I believe there's been some new contracts offered in Norfolk and Suffolk, but they're only for 4 years. You have to work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 365 days a year. You know, lots of people do that, don't they? But evidently dentists have to. So you'd have to buy a premise, you have to get planning permission, you'd have to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds just to set it up. And then lo and behold, after 4 years, you might be told, sorry, contract's being taken away from you. What do you do? If you're in a place like Leiston, or you can't just suddenly go private because you haven't got the people. So of course, no one's going to take those contracts up. I've spoken to some young dentists and they just laughed and said we won't go anywhere near that. You know, a lot of young dentists now know that they'll never own their own practices. So a lot of them are now just out to make money. So they all become private dentists and, you know, they're just not bothered with the NHS anymore because the NHS isn't bothered with them. The bottom line is that every government I've come across just is not interested in dentistry at all. And they're more than happy that the corporates are taking over because they can tick the boxes and governments can turn around and say, well, they tick the boxes, they're doing the right thing. But I know they're not. I think it was interesting that Johnbosco said that the GPs are all being taken over. This is exactly what happened in dentistry about 10 years ago. You know, a few people would buy out a few practices and they'd sell on to the next lot and they'd sell on, and all profits being made all the way along. You know, it's very interesting that somebody like Richard Branson has just spent £2 billion over the last 5 years getting NHS contracts. Now, he doesn't do anything unless he's going to make money from it. So, you know, I just do not know where we can go from here, to be honest. The only way I can see around it is to get rid of this contract system and let it go back to dentists being able to open up their own practices again. But again, how that would be funded, I don't know. Right, I think that's more or less what I've got to say for now, but I'd be glad to answer any questions later on. Oh, one other thing I forgot to tell you was that obviously during COVID, dentists, doctors, we couldn't work like we normally work. We all know that. Dentists had to find their own PPE at extortionate costs. For example, a box of masks used to cost about £5, and then during COVID, they went up to about 50 quid. So there was those sort of increases. Practice I worked in spent £5,000 on a ventilating system so that they could increase the turnover of patients. I don't think any of the corporates did that, so they're still quite slow at seeing people. Yeah, I think that, yeah, we weren't allowed to put staff on furlough because the contract was paying for their wages. But they told us in April this year that we had to pay back 16.75% of our contract that they gave us because we didn't work hard enough. And that was for the first 4 months. We haven't been told yet what the clawback's going to be for the next 4 months, but they can just out of the blue say, give us some money back. Okay, hope that's been of some help, but please ask me any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Again, without people like Helen and their investment in campaigns like Toothless in Suffolk, you know, you're hearing from the dentist's voice as they see it, working in the NHS, what it is, a huge strain, the personal strain, personal and with family, extended family, etc., the strain that the dentists have been put under through this, the current contract that they're working to. I think Helen, if I may say, I think your contribution tonight, and thank you again for it, I think it will be a reference point for campaigns across Suffolk and Norfolk and beyond the east of England. And I think by having experts as part of your campaign or any campaign, it offers that campaign a huge impetus, huge insight into the real challenges that confront us on a daily basis. Thank you for that. And I think what also Helen has highlighted, as she mentioned about the, and I strongly believe, and we in the campaign and others outside of the campaign looking at us have come to sort of form a common opinion on this, that the fact that the Norfolk and Suffolk contracts that were announced, the new ones that are going to be announced, well, were announced just a week or two ago, that were going to come in on stream in 2022, were as a response to the Toothless in Suffolk campaign. We have certainly made our voice heard, and our next guest, our next panelist is will no doubt be speaking about that. But we, as Johnbosco illustrated with We Own It, organised campaigns, same with what Jo Rust, her contribution with the Save Our Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn. Well-organised campaigns with strategic plans, etc., do help raise the profile and put pressure on those organisations that are responsible for operating those healthcare provision. So whilst, and it goes on, you know, with this new contract for Norfolk and Suffolk dentists, it shows you that whilst we believe it was a hurried response, they can at least say, we have a plan. Whether that plan works, and Helen's already explained that the likelihood of that new contract working for any new dentist is, well, it's a pipe dream. You know, you could say, yes, we've got a plan, and that sort of ticks that box, really. But just as Jo's campaign, Jo mentioned about the Queen Elizabeth campaign, not going to end until they get full funding for a new hospital, a rebuilding of a hospital. So the Toothless in Suffolk campaign will continue on behalf of those that are just finding everything a struggle, and the injustices that go along with that struggle. So thank you very much, Helen, for that. And we'll no doubt we'll have some questions for you later. But we'll now move on to our final speaker, Steve Marsling, originally from South London. Steve has a long and arguably unparalleled record in fighting injustices wherever they may be. In the 1970s, Steve took part in a clandestine mission to spread anti-apartheid propaganda in South Africa on behalf of the ANC. His actions, if caught, would have left him incarcerated in a South African jail, and he would have, without doubt, been subjected to torture, or unless if he had been caught, of course. A film about he and his fellow activists is soon to be released, called London Recruits. Steve is one of the principal founders of the Toothless in Suffolk campaign. Communities in Suffolk are suffering from dentist closures and the widespread lack of local dental treatment under the NHS. The campaign provides a voice for patients demanding full reinstatement of local NHS dentistry provision. Everybody, welcome Steve Marsling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those kind words, and thank you, Mark, for hosting this, and thank you very much all the panelists and the Morning Star supporters group of Suffolk and Norfolk and the Communist Party of Britain for allowing us to take part tonight. Well, the story begins in Leiston, which a few years ago had two dental practices. One was run by Bupa, the other one was run by my dentist, which actually was my dentist. As from April of this year, we haven't got any dentist at all. They both pulled out, saying they couldn't afford to make a profit and keep their shareholders happy because Leiston was too poor. It's a crime under this government to be poor, as you know. And also the conglomerates that run this, that run the dental practices now, are not interested in providing a service unless they're making a huge amount of money from it. So let's go back to 1948 and Clement Attlee and Nye Bevin's idea of an NHS service free at the point of use. I remember in school in the 1950s and early 60s, we used to get dentists coming into school. We had dental nurses teaching us how to clean our teeth. We had dentists all around every high street going. Everybody had a dentist. And now, in 2021, in the 5th richest country in the world, you can't get a bloody dentist. It beggars belief that we are going backwards. And for dentists, you can read hospitals, you can read GPs, you can read healthcare workers, people living in children's homes, people in old people's homes, people in care homes. We are going backwards because this government, and I have to say some Labour governments before them, put profit before people. So anyway, I thought, I'm not having this. I've lost my dentist. I'm not doing that. So out comes the pace table, got a few petitions, and I'll go and stand in Leiston High Street outside the co-op. I have to say that the last time I had a situation where people were queuing to sign a petition was when Margaret Thatcher tried to close the GLC. And the same effect in our area was, you know, queuing, people queuing, saying, what are we going to do? How can we get away with this? It's a disgusting situation. And so we looked around and I said to Mark, well, I wonder, you know, is it just Leiston then? And he looked at Felixstowe and others looked at Bury St Edmunds and other areas. And we found out this has been going on. And, you know, no one has mounted a campaign, and they were quietly, by stealth, closing down NHS Dental Services. Well, we decided we ain't having it. We're going to make a noise and make a shout. Also, what inspired us, sadly, was the stories that we heard. The stories of immense pain that people went through. People pulling out their teeth like it's the bloody 1930s, like there was no National Health Service at all, and people were there. I mean, honestly, you know, what are we coming to? People who were in immense financial hardship didn't know how to pay the rent because they'd been forced to go private and were paying out £500, £600 for a tooth extraction. And that is an appalling situation for a country that founded its welfare state in 1948. So we contacted the newspapers, East Anglia Daily Times, Bury Free Press. They did videos of us. They run stories about our campaign. They put Joe Churchill, who's the Minister for Dental Services and also the MP for Bury St Edmunds, on the back foot. She remained silent. So we got all our petitions. we've got nearly 5,500 signatures now, both online and in ink. And we went and told her, we're coming to your offices in Bury, and we want to present these petitions with you. We'll be there at a certain time and a certain place. And she didn't turn up, and nor did any of her advisors. Unfortunately for her, the newspapers turned up and gave her a right coating because, you know, she's just arrogant. She's done absolutely nothing. She's called the Minister for NHS Dental Services. Quite frankly, she has the easiest job in the world because there ain't any. She must be a whiz at Sudoku and stuff like that, because I don't know what she does all day, because she does absolutely nothing to try and alleviate this situation. So we got on Radio Suffolk, and they said, would you do a talk, question and answer thing on what's called the Mark Murphy show? So we did that, and quite honestly, the place exploded. They didn't know what hit them. So many people phoned in and said their situation was intolerable, etc., etc. They had to spread it over another programme, and they led with it on the main news. Then Channel 5 got hold of us and said, look, we heard that, can you come on our news programme at 5 o'clock? So we've had all these situations where we've tried very, very hard to bring to the public, and the public are on our side. There is no question about this, they're on our side. But we have to keep plugging away, we have to keep fighting. And so on October the 17th, here it is, here's the leaflet, we've got the posters. We are marching on Bury St Edmunds. We are marching on October the 17th on a Sunday. We're assembling around 11 o'clock, and we're calling on all people from the Labour movement, from the non-Labour movement, anyone that wants to get involved in any political party, because although this is a political campaign, it's not a party political campaign. We would love to see you there, where we'll do a short march and then a demonstration in the Abbey Gardens. And we want it as big as possible, because we have to find out a way to make these people pay attention. And the reason we need to do this is because if you think things are bad, and they are, think how bad they would be if people like you weren't protesting. Think how much they would get, the Tory government would get away with if they thought you weren't around. If we have these people, if we all join together, and if we make a noise, and if we demonstrate, and if we don't go away, just like the Extinction Rebellion people, they have to listen to us eventually. Unfortunately, it has to be the people, both inside, you know, the Labour movement. We're getting no help at all from the Labour leadership, and it pains me to say that, but it's a fact. They don't want to know. They're too frightened of their own shadow. So it's got to be individual people, individual Labour Party members, Green Party members, Communist Party members, Lord help us, even Liberal Democrats, if they can get off their backsides. You know, we need these people, and we need them to come together on October the 17th. Another thing we've found is that it isn't just in Suffolk, as Joe said, it's in Norfolk. We've had people from Yorkshire saying, well, it's just the same up here. So we're going to go to the next stage of a campaign where it will be toothless in England as well. But please, please come to the demonstration, October the 17th. Give us a hand. We're still carrying on with our street stalls. We're still battling. We ain't going to give up. We're going nowhere until we get these dentists back. And the response that we've had from the government is, we'll have something for you in the summer of 2022. So for a year, you can suffer the pain, you can suffer the financial hardship, and we'll get something to you maybe somewhere. But it ain't going to be in Leiston because we're too poor, because they'll have to do private practice to subsidise it. So it won't be coming here. And also, the notice for the new contract doesn't say where it's going to be. It could be Wells next to the sea, or Sheringham up in North Norfolk for all we know. So I'll end on that note, but don't give up. As my old mate, fellow Millwall supporter Bob Crow used to say, if you fight, you won't always win. But if you don't fight, you'll always lose. Keep fighting, keep roaring. We'll see you all on October the 17th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Just echo everything that Steve was saying about that. All of us, every single one of us on this webinar, panelists, right through to those who are watching this now and in the future, all those who have joined the campaigns across the country are in awe of the NHS and what it does, and what it can do for us as a population, as citizens of England and Wales. We must support the NHS at every opportunity, and just really as an aside to well, Steve mentioned about the street stalls. He and I have been running street stalls for a number of months now since we launched the campaign in Leiston, Felixstowe, and there's been some in Bury St Edmunds as well. The stories that we hear, the testimony that we hear from those that come to our stand and want to sign the petition, are telling us these stories that, quite frankly, I've been close to tears. I'll be honest with you, I've been close to tears with some of the stories. The hardship that people are going through is just incredible, and you know, that's just with one single aspect of NHS provision, and that's dentistry. It's heartbreaking, and we won't stop. Steve and I and likes of Joe and Helen and Johnbosco, we won't stop. We'll keep on plugging away. But one of the things that on the street stalls, people have been coming up and saying, I'm lucky, I've got a dentist, but I'll sign your petition because others I know haven't got a dentist. And that's the sort of spirit that we need, all of us need, every one of those panelists and those that have been running webinars on this type of issue up and down the length and breadth of this country. That's the sort of support that they all need and are crying out for. So I implore you to join these campaigns, offer support where you can, and promote, and it's easy enough these days to share stuff on your social media accounts, etc., etc. But the more people know about these campaigns, the better chance that that voice can be amplified through those campaigns. So please join them and support them. We're going to go now to, we've got around about 10 minutes or so, it's not a lot of time, to have a Q&A. And we've got some questions that have come in. And I'll begin with this one from a gentleman in Cambridge, Frank. He says, and we'll ask Joe to kick this off, if I may direct this one at Joe. There are so many campaigns for the NHS. Can't the TUC pull them all together so they can support each other and raise the temperature, the issue, raise the temperature and raise the issue publicly through the TUC?
I think it's a really good idea, and I was sort of when Johnbosco was telling us about the APMS contracts, I was thinking, why don't we know about these through our trade unions? And when he was saying, I know about integrated care systems, but I didn't know that people from private companies will be able to sit on these boards. I thought it was bad enough that the CCG could commission their own services, but this sounds even worse. And my thought was, well, why aren't we finding out about these through our trade unions? But for some of them, we're going to have limited membership in them. So although our GP services to us are part of the NHS, they're actually all private contractors. And I know that Johnbosco said that many of them were small scale and work for their local community, but that's rarely the case now. When it comes to what we perceive as the NHS in our hospitals, a lot of those campaigns, so for example, our campaign about the rack planks, I've reached out to some of the other people in the areas that have rack plank hospitals to see whether they wanted to do a coordinated campaign, because they can be they can get out of hand, they can get large, but I don't think there's a joint string that the TUC could take and tie them all together in an easy to understand way. I mean, I do think that Johnbosco made a lot of it easy to understand, but it just gets vast because it is about the privatisation of our NHS. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. But the NHS will say we will always be publicly funded. So it's difficult to get this comprehension from the public about what we're arguing about. So sometimes I do think we need to keep our campaigns individual and concentrate on things like terms and conditions on the wider from the wider TUC. But in matter of fact, I'd just like to see more trade union engagement at every level, because that's one of the things that we've noticed is severely lacking in our campaign, and that's a take up from the trade union members that are actually in the hospital. We do have trade union members that are involved, but very few of them, bearing in mind that it's one of the biggest employers in the town. So, you know, I think that Frank's idea is a good one, but I think that the TUC would see it as unwieldy and unmanageable and difficult to bring central strands down.
Thank you for that, Joe. I echo that. I'm all for union engagement, and we do need to realise that we've communicated as Toothless in Suffolk with many unions operating out of Ipswich Hospital and West Suffolk Hospital, and many members. You know, we're very rich in union members working in the health service in Suffolk and beyond, and we just hope they can pick up on the emails that we've sent and offer and lend their support. But I'm quite sure we will see them turning up on October the 17th at the rally in Bury St Edmunds in Abbey Gardens. Here's one for Helen. So thank you for that, and thank you, Frank, for your question. Helen, there's a question from James. This may or may not, you may or may not have knowledge of this, but if I could ask you just to perhaps give a little bit more explanation of what UDAs are. James asked, are the UDAs also relevant in Scotland?
Yes, England and Wales are the same. I'm not 100% sure about Scotland, but I believe they do have a UDA system, yes. As I said, a UDA is a unit of dental activity. Your contract might require you to do anything from 7,000 to 10,000 UDAs a year. And also the big unfairness is how much your UDA level is actually worth. When the system very first came out in 2006, I worked in a practice where they gave us a UDA level of £20. So for every UDA we did, we got £20. Around the corner, there was a dentist who had a lot of clout, and he was paid £35 a UDA. So for the same checkup, he got £35 and we got 20. So again, the system's just bonkers all the way through. Yeah, does that help?
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Unit of dental activity. There's a lot of jargon in all areas of life and work, and the more we do to, as this webinar has been set up to do, the more we do to explain the inner workings of, in this case, the NHS and its funding and its contracts, etc., the better it is for everybody I'm hoping this will be a good educational resource when it's available to view again on the various platforms. Okay, thank you for that, and thank you. I think it was James who asked the question, and Helen who helped provide an answer. We have another one here from Fee, who says accountants are running a caring service as a business. Running a caring service as a business doesn't work, and that's, you know, having accountants run these services. It doesn't work. I worked for a dental corporate as the contracts changed in 2006, and likened my time as selling my soul to the devil. And I think that pretty much explains, or you know, it's a position where Helen has found herself and has resisted going down that avenue wherever she has been able to. So thank you for that comment, Fee. Earlier on this evening, we had a question from David. Thank you very much, David, for your question. He says, my question is, as a taxpayer, long-term national insurance contributor, how can I claim compensation when the government is not providing an NHS service that I'm paying for? And 111, which is a frontline private company, has told me they can't do anything for me when no NHS dentist is available in my area, and I'm being forced to go private. Bearing in mind Gavin Williamson has declared students not receiving a proper face-to-face relationship with lecturers are not getting the service they are paying for so should we claim compensation? Steve, do you want to pick that one up?
Yes, thank you very much. I often liken it to, you know, when I was younger, we used to have a Christmas club. My mother used to pay in you know, so much to the local greengrocer, and you know, to run the Christmas, and when it's Christmas, all the stuff come. And one time, horror of horrors, this geezer who was running it ran away with the Christmas club money. And that's exactly what this government is doing, because I've paid 45 years of national insurance money. I've paid 45 years of tax, and I expected a National Health Service to look after me as I grow older, and to look after my children and my grandchildren, because we paid in that money. It's theft. That's what it is. It's theft. And that's, the more people start to talk about theft of services, theft of our monies that we're not receiving goods for, then I think people will sit up and take notice, because quite frankly, you're absolutely right. You can't claim compensation, because as far as everyone's concerned, they think it's okay that they can get away with this. Well, it ain't. You know, we have paid in money, and we're still, people are paying in money now who are not retired like me. So we have to find a way of getting that money back. I'm not so sure if there is a legal route. I don't know. I'm sure this government has closed it off. But what we have got is a situation where people are paying in money for services that they are not getting, because the people that are being forced to go private and getting themselves into incredible debt. Let's not kid ourselves. Some people are in incredible debt. They can't pay their rent, they can't pay their mortgage, they're going to food banks to feed their children, all because of problems with their teeth. So if there is a legal route, I would love to know it, and maybe we can consult some kind of friendly lawyers. But I just wonder, and I've just seen Lee Day defended me. I was a Suffolk councillor, and they tried to sue me for about £6 million and rising, and it was Lee Day that defended me, Joe, and got me off. got me off Thatcher's list. But that's another story. But that was the rate capping back in the 80s. But yes, it's well worth looking at. But people have got to start thinking of it as having money that they've paid stolen from them. And I think it's an absolute, Dave Whitten is absolutely spot on. We should be looking at this, and Lee Day would be the people to go to, I would think, to find out whether we have a legal case because we have paid in this money and we are not getting any services for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Dave, for the question. It's a question that, you heard Steve say that we've not heard from the Minister, Joe Churchill. We've not heard anything. It's been radio silence despite several attempts, several contacts with her office through email, etc. We've not heard back, but it's something we're demanding, obviously, a delegation, send a delegation to Joe Churchill, the Minister for NHS Dentistry, and that's one of the points that we'll put to her. You know, where's the compensation for those that have been forced to go private? I'm gonna draw this webinar to a close now. I'd like to thank everybody who has attended, including the panelists, for their valuable contributions and insight into the struggles that they are going through and those that they're working on behalf of. I'd also like to thank Phil and David and Calvin and those at the Morning Star and the CP for helping put on this webinar, and encourage everybody to support the Morning Star. If you can pick up a paper, the Morning Star at your local news agent, then please pick it up. It's a newspaper that's out on a daily basis, printed 6 days a week, and you will see that it's a paper that hasn't been bought by and refuses and will never be bought by the establishment, and it speaks truth to power. Please urge everyone, once again, the message is get involved in your community action groups, those that, and we're focusing on the NHS, please join up. Please, if you want to start a campaign, a Toothless campaign in your neck of the woods, get in contact with us. If you're in West Norfolk, go out and support the weekly demonstrations outside the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and stand up and alongside Joe Rust and the many campaigners that are outside the hospital. Show your support for the campaign, and in so doing, you're showing support for those NHS workers. As far as NHS dentists are concerned, they're not a greedy bunch. Those that are working and trying to deliver an NHS service are not a greedy bunch. They are being hamstrung by a contract that is unwieldy and unworkable. And those proposals for new contracts are equally so, unwieldy, unworkable. We have to join together. We have to campaign to improve matters, not just for ourselves, but for those that are providing healthcare for us and on behalf of the NHS. Thank you, everyone. I wish you well. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Keep fighting.